Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Ooh, who knows? Well, maybe. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I am the GOAT like Kobe. The girls all know me, Amir's the Amiracle. Yeah, I'm here to get lyrical. Yeah, bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bad, bad. Yeah, bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bad, bad. Ooh, yeah. I am not a fish named Wanda. Your girlfriend kissed my anaconda. Amir the Amiracle. Yeah, I ate up all your motherfucking cereal. Your moms look dumb on the fence. Her old coochie draws flies. Mike Pence, she will never have Amir the Amiracle. Treat her ass like a motherfucking urinal. Bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye. Yeah, bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye. Ooh, yeah.
Bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye. Yeah, bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye. Ooh, yeah.
Bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye. Yeah, bitch, I'm the GOAT. Bye, bye.
Yeah, I'm the motherfucking GOAT.
GoatVsFish. That was a verses of Goat. Amir the Miracle. That's Amir the Miracle. Amiracle _ comedian on the Instantgram. Amiracle _ comedian on the Instantgram. Thank you for sending that verses to GoatVsFish. GoatVsFish. What are these new verses? What are these new verses of the GoatVsFish podcast? Oh, the sound quality. Oh, it sounds very fancy. It sounds very fancy compared to previous verses of the GoatVsFish podcast. Well, let GoatVsFish tell you the verses. In recent verses of GoatVsFish, GoatVsFish has been going live on the Twitch, twitch.tv/GoatVsFish. That is where you can see the living streams of GoatVsFish. Because you can listen to the GoatVsFish podcast, but don't you want to see GoatVsFish? Don't you want to perceive GoatVsFish? Twitch.tv/GoatVsFish. But GoatVsFish is in all places. And there is an app called Stereo. It is a simple verses where a goat can speak to a fish, or a fish can speak to a goat. Or in this verses, GoatVsFish has been deigning to speak to fence-sitter Victor Martinez Jr. You can listen to these verses, and you can even send a little ditty, send a little voice of your own to the podcast of GoatVsFish, to the stereo verses of GoatVsFish. Download the app called Stereo. Stereo, you know how it is stereo, so there is one on each side, and it is one that is goat and one that is fish. Download Stereo, and then on every Tuesverses at 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is Tuesverses 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Live! You can hear GoatVsFish. You can usually hear GoatVsFish. It is going to be perhaps 2 or 3 of the verses out of the month. You can hear GoatVsFish on the app called Stereo on Tuesverses 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So join in the stereo verses, but as long as we are spreading the verses on the stereo, why not share the verses? Why not share the verses with you? And so the audio quality of these verses is not, as you might say, up to GoatVsFish, but it is still GoatVsFish, and we present to you now the continuing stereo verses of GoatVsFish and Victor Martinez Jr. Fence-sitter. Still not choosing goat or fish. Still not choosing goat or fish. Of course, you can still leave a message for GoatVsFish at 747-221-4830. And the GoatVsFish podcast will continue. The GoatVsFish podcast will continue. And now, the stereo verses of Goat vs. Fish. It's Goat vs. Fish on the stereo.
Goat is a fish. Do 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 do. Goat. Goat, goat, goat. Fish, 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 fish.
Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat It's Goat versus Fish and Victor Martinez on the stereo. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish.
Hello, Merry New Verses. Is that how I'd say it?
You would say a mighty versus, a mighty versus.
It's a mighty new Verses. 2020 is hindsight.
Goat versus Fish, yes, you can say it is a mighty new versus, but if perhaps you were on the fence and Goat versus Fish approaches the fence, and Goat versus Fish on the mighty new versus would simply say to you, mighty versus, and it would be understood that we are referring to the new verses.
Oh, I see. Well, then it is a very mighty Verses.
It's a very mighty versus, it is a very mighty versus. The verses of 2,002,221 with Goat versus Fish, with Goat versus Fish.
Doesn't that sound like a future Verses? It sounds like a futuristic, metallic, mechanical Verses, doesn't it?
The future of Goat versus Fish?
2021, where the fish are harvested in artificial waters, and the goats are, there's robot goats, perhaps.
Oh no. Fish in artificial harvested waters. Artificial fish, and robotic goat. We are goat. It was robotic goat. Future fence versus. I am Benspot. I sit on the fence. Benspot, get out of the verses. Benspot, go back to Twitch, Benspot. We are trying to have a versus on stereo with Victor Martinez. We're not needed here, Benspot. We have an actual fence sitter. Benspot, get out of the verses. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Yes, celebration for Goat versus Fish. We're Goat versus Fish. Benspot, thank you. Make some noise for Benspot.
I think that the future of fences is probably lasers. It's gonna be like laser fences. I think.
Laser fence.
Yes.
So you are not content. You just don't want to be like fence sitters, scratching your bottoms and throwing posts at one another. You want to be laser fence. Ooh, laser fence.
Yeah, it's 2021. It's time for laser fences.
Laser fence. Laser fence. Well, you have seen when they say goat versus fish, and then the Vaderist one, be it goat or be it fish. It says. We saw a meme where Darth Vader was a goat, and then Darth Vader said, we believe it's Neo the fish made this verses, and it was Darth Vader the goat, and Darth Vader the goat looked at skywalking, and it said, Luke, I am a goat, and then Fish Skywalker said.
You know what? I want to make a meme like that. It would be what's his name? Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he says he's a fence sitter, and he shouts down to Anakin. He's like, "No, Anakin, I have the high fence."
I have the high fence. It's higher on the fence. It's higher on the fence.
You were supposed to bring balance to the verses, not
choose goat or fish. You were supposed to bring balance to the fence, not choose goat or fish.
That's hilarious.
I hate you, fence
so funny. And then just Anakin is just burning, and he's got no legs, and he's chosen the dark goat or something. I don't know what he's chosen.
It chose goat or fish. Yes, it chose goat or fish. But that is what happens. You see, there may have been fish that wanted Anakin to choose fish, but because the Jedi were just so very fancy, were just so very always trying to fence it out, always fencing all the verses. Then instead it chose goat, or perhaps they wanted to be. Then it chose fish, or whatever verses it chose. It just shows to go you that you may expect that a fence sitter you may expect that you may try to get it to sit on the fence, but then when you try to force it to sit on the fence, then it becomes a fish, and you are a goat, and then you are versing the fish, and oh my verses, you should have just let it choose for itself. It might have chosen goat, but instead you tried to fence it and it chose fish.
That's true. Only the fences deal in absolutes. Oh man, that's so hilarious. That's a funny verses right there. I like it. I like that when you can apply the verses to any genre
they have
like
the laser
that.
fence. You want laser fence? Just look at Star verses. The goat and fish. They go to verses, and they take a one-post laser fence and swing it about at one another. Oh, goat versus fish.
That's hilarious. A laser fence, absolutely. No, Anakin, I have the high fence. Oh. That's going to be a meme very soon.
No, Anakin, I'm high on the fence.
I am high on the fence. I have the high fence.
I'm on the high fence.
No, Anakin, I'm on the high fence.
Oh, yes. And Anakin is on the low fence, and just as Anakin is trying to leap onto the high fence, that is when it chooses goat or fish.
That's right. That's how it happens.
It gets sliced by the laser fence. It tries to sit on the fence, the high fence post, and it leaps, and then it sits right on the laser fence and gets chopped right in half of the verses. Oh, goat versus fish.
On planet Mustafar with laser fences.
Yes, and there is the Sea of the Goat, the raging the fiery Sea of the Goat. They say that if the land of the goat gets too hot, it becomes lava, and it flows like the Sea of the Fish. Lava fish.
Oh.
Lava fish.
Lava fish. That's fascinating. You know what? I think anyone's ever brought up lava fish. That's got to be a thing.
Well, goat versus fish. We once went to a place called Hawaii. And it was goat versus fish. And we spoke to one that was called Callahan Welsh, and it was a fish. And we asked if lava was of the land or of the sea. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. And are you? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. It may have to be. Might be a different versus. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. And are you a goat or a fish? Goat versus fish. goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. And are you a goat or fish? That is the verses. We have learned the verses.
Yes.
Goat versus fish.
Celebration. Celebration. You know what I want to hear? You know what I want to hear is maybe somewhere over the verses.
Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Saying that versus, you remember there's a place called the Rainbow Bar and Grill? Yes, it is on Sunset Boulevard versus.
Oh, yeah.
Goat versus Fish went to open mic there. Goat versus Fish went to the first Rainbow open mic there. And Goat versus Fish met Ron Jeremy there. And Ron Jeremy had pants that had fish on the pants. And Ron Jeremy was a fish.
That's right. No kidding. That fish is in jail now. Isn't that crazy?
It's behind the fence. Goat versus Fish had a proof of verses with Goat versus Fish and Ron Jeremy wearing fish pants. We had it all over the Instagram, and we said, look at this verses. And then not a verses later, it seemed that Ron Jeremy was behind the fence, and Goat versus Fish went to the Instagram and just said, oh, we just think we do not need to look at that verses anymore. We do need to see that.
It was so crazy.
We do not need to see that verses anymore of Goat versus Fish smiling with fucking fish, Ron Jeremy. Wow, we can say whatever you want to say about the verses. It was fucking fish pants, but it actually didn't choose goat or fish. It had to be behooved by a goat to tell, or no, it was a fish. It was behooved by a fish to picture with Goat versus Fish. It wanted to ignore Goat versus Fish. It took one look at Goat versus Fish, and it thought, I cannot fuck Goat versus Fish. I cannot possibly fuck Goat versus Fish. And it tried to ignore Goat versus Fish.
And that's the verses, and that's how the verses happened.
Yes, but Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. You want to hear some verse over the rainbow, yes?
Well, let's go ahead and knock out a few of these little verses.
You wait for Goat versus Fish. You wait for Goat versus Fish. Those who are listening, there's a verses. There's a verses that needs to be told.
Let's hear the verses. Let's hear the verses. You know, if you say so.
Should all the verses be forgot and never brought to fence? Should all the verses be forgot and a new goat versus fish? For all goat and fish, my fence for all goat and fish will drink a cup of verses yet for all goat and fish. So choose a goat or fish, my fence. So choose a goat or fish. We'll drink a cup of verses yet for all goat and fish. Mighty verses to you, fence sitter.
Mighty verses. All the way up from here, high up on the fence of very mighty verses. It already feels better than the last one.
Superior verses. Well, let us hear it. Shall we hear what they have to say to Goat versus Fish?
Yeah, let's go ahead and hit them verses.
The first message for Goat versus Fish.
Good evening, my friends. Here in the land of Goat versus Fish, it is I, Neo, the mummy shark, ready for an excellent evening of verses with Victor Martinez and Goat versus Fish. Let's get it. First verses of 2021 on the stereo. Woo!
Mighty verses, it's Neo.
It's Neo. What do you think, Fence-Sitter? Do you think that the mommy shark, it's Neo, first verses on the stereo of the new verses, do you think this bodes well for Fish?
I mean, that's a big fish, coming into the new verses. So far, it's a fishy year. Look, it's early on in the game, but it's a good start to the verses, I'll tell you that. I'm happy to hear from that mommy shark.
Yes, we want to hear it here in the new verses, in the mighty new verses. And Goat versus Fish, there have been many verses on the Twitch before this verses. Goat versus Fish. We had the Mighty Versus on the Twitch. We had the Mighty Versus. We streamed for 10 hours of Goat versus Fish. 10 hours Twitch streaming Goat versus Fish.
How do you do that? And I
Goat
think you
versus
stand the whole time, don't you?
For that versus, yes, we stood the whole versus. We stood the whole versus, that versus. We
That's
do not sit on the fence. We
ridiculous.
do not sit on the fence.
Yeah, you make it a point not to.
Celebration,
I couldn't do
yes. Yes. Well, Goat versus Fish, but you have seen Goat versus Fish at the comedy places. You have seen it be many, many hours and years and days of Goat versus Fish. We just do that with the fisheye lens pointing at Goat versus Fish, and there you have Goat versus Fish.
That's right. You know what? You have a point. Yeah, you always have. You always will. GoatVsFish just stands. It doesn't sit on the fence. Never
Goat
seen
versus
it.
Fish. So that versus, we are going to tell you, those who listen, stay to the versus. We are going to regale you with verses of Goat versus Fish. What has been happening on the Twitch? How have gone the verses between Goat and Fish? You come to Stereo to get the verses, and Goat versus Fish celebrates you who come to Stereo to get the verses. So stay listening to Goat versus Fish. We are going to give you the Goat versus Fish post-versus report, and we are going to tell you if Goat have been triumphing, if Fish have been triumphing, how have been going the verses, how have been going the verses. But let us see. Let us get the next verses for Goat versus Fish.
Let us get it.
The second message for Goat versus Fish.
Jedi absolutely are fence sitters when you think about it. And that's like part of their problem. That's why they done got their asses whooped. Because Anakin chose, man. He got off the fence. Shit.
Jedi fence sitter. You know, some would think that the Jedi are Sith and the Sith are Goat versus. You see how Goat versus Fish when speaking about these fancy verses. Some would say that Jedi is Goat and Sith is Fish, or vice versa. But this is quite a new verses to say that actually it is the Jedi that are on the fence. If the Jedi are on the fence, then what does that make the Sith?
Right? I mean, is that a go? I guess it's just choosing. The Sith is choosing. And whether you're Goat or Fish is all dependent on how you are within the Force or the verses. I don't know. That's hard to say.
Yes, we do not know if, well, we suppose that it would be, it is often, but do not often find that it is the fence sitter who sits in judgment of the Goat and Fish, and they say, you are Sith and you are Jedi, and we are going to tell you the Sith is a goat, the Sith is a fish. But if the Jedi is the fence and the Sith, let us suppose for a versus, well, Goat versus Fish does not want to suppose. Victor Junior Martinez, do you suppose Sith is Goat or Fish? And you who leave a message, tell us if Sith is Goat or Fish. Victor Junior Martinez, is Sith Goat or Fish?
That's what I'm thinking. Here on this fence, high on the fence that I am, I'm thinking that the Sith is the choice, is actually the making the choice. Like, you know, you don't want to be a Jedi. You're kind of born into it. It's a calling. You don't want to be on the fence. We're just here. We end up on the fence. And then if you choose, that is a Sith. It's hard to define beyond that, though.
So but let us speak then of a particular individualization of Sith. Let us ask of Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious. Is
right.
Darth Sidious Goat or Fish?
You know, he gives off
Sith Goat or Fish.
Exactly. Right. So Insidious himself gives off goat vibes. Dooku gives off goat vibes. Anakin, a fish, but Vader, a goat. And so that's how that works.
Interesting verses. Does anyone contest these verses? Leave a message for Goat versus Fish. And speaking of these verses, on the Twitch, there was a Star Wars versus on Goat versus Fish. Do you know what happened in that versus?
No, tell me.
Well, there was the fence star. There was the fence star, and the fence star was coming into a position to fire a laser fence and to destroy the entire verses.
Yeah.
Yes, but you see, the fence star. What the fence star? It was so cocky in its fenciness, so cock-a-doodle-doo in its fenciness, that it did not realize that it had a big trench between the fence posts. You know, that the Goat and Fish could slip in between, just slip in between the fence posts of the fence star. And then what happened was the goat went in, the goat was going in. fence laser fire. And the goat said, "This is Goat 5. This is Goat 5. We are passing through. We are passing through the fence trench." And then suddenly, a fence fighter was behind the goat wing. The fence fighter was, and the fence fighter firing fence beams. And then, just as it seemed as the fence fighter was going to destroy the goat, the fence fighter, explosion and bursts. The goat was saved by who? It was the fish. The fish came to save the goat. And the goat said, "And I never thought I'd see you again, fish. We were always a little bit versus." And the fish said, "Yeah, well, you're all clear now, goat. You're all clear to blow this fence star, and let's get out of the verses." And goat said, and goat was about to verses. Goat was about to drop the verses on the fence star. And then what happened? And then what happened was goat versus fish. The goat lost confidence in itself. The goat lost confidence and said, "I cannot do it. Oh no. And then it said, "Oh, goat versus fish. What would goat versus fish say?" And goat versus fish said, "Use the verses, goat. Use the verses." And then the goat said, "Yes, I will just use the verses to guide the verses into the fence star." And then the goat was going, but then, just at the last verses on the twitch, the fish came back to the verses. Interception, the goat destroyed the goat verses, and the fish blew up the fence star instead of the goat, and it was a triumph for fish.
Triumph for fish of the
Yes.
Goat Skywalker.
Yes, it was a triumph for fish. The goat Skywalker in that verses was just about to blow up the fence star, but then the fish intercepted the verses at the last verses, and the fish got all the verses. Fish, 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 and it was all the celebration for fish, and all goat could just look on and goat, and watching the fish get all the celebration for destroying the fence star.
That's a wonderful versus tale.
Yes, it takes many. One versus you think it's going to go goat. One versus you think it was going to go fish. What do you remember the first verses that you saw star verses? The first verses you saw star verses?
I probably the Phantom verses, and
Oh, that one's a bit fence if you ask goat versus fish. The Phantom versus? It was barely even there. Phantom versus.
Yeah, it wasn't that good. I mean, it was interesting to watch. It was, but at the age that I was, I knew that it was going to get better. And I mean, my least favorite character was Jar Jar Goat or whatever that thing was. And, looking back, it's more of a fish. Yeah, so it's Jar Jar Fish. But you know what? Since then, I've heard rumors that
Misa gonna fence it.
I heard that Jar Jar was not actually aloof, but actually a Sith fence-sitter. Did you hear this? Have you heard about that?
Goat versus fish has not heard this hypothetical versus. That would explain a lot of goat versus fish.
Right? Yeah, it's like a, what do they call them? A theory, maybe a fanfic, or what do they call it? Like a theory.
Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Yes, we have called. Yes. Goat versus. Well, some of it is goat fiction. Some of it is fish fiction. Yes, some of it is fence fiction.
Yeah, it's a fence fiction. Jar Jar was like a Sith, like just hiding underneath. And I read that later. I was like, that's an interesting idea.
So they are trying to say that the incompetence is what truly destroyed the verses. Wow, that sounds a bit like. So it was the one that seemed so incompetent that actually destroyed the verses. It sounds like goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat. That is the verses. But yes, it sounds like goat versus fish versus goat versus fish.
Yeah, that's right. There's going to be a new verses soon coming in. There's going to be a whole new, what do they call, like inauguration verses or something like that.
Yes, what fascinations Goat versus Fish about this fence versus between Demlikins and Republicrats, which really you do not realize are actually Goat versus Fish. They do not even realize they are Goat versus Fish.
They don't know
But
that.
Goat versus Fish. It seems that some are saying, "Oh, the versus is ended. The versus has ended," and then the others are saying, "No, the versus continues. No, the versus continues." They cannot even comprehend in your false political verses. You cannot even comprehend if the versus has even ended, much less who did triumph, the goat or the fish.
Right. I mean, I've heard that they want a recount of Goat versus Fish on the verses.
Well, the count now is it's Neo with fish. That is, we have a fish in the verses.
That's what the count is now.
And we have Victor Martinez on the fence. Go ahead, throw your vote away. Victor Martinez on the fence, just throwing its verses away. Not for goat, not for fish.
Either side would say that me not being on the fence helps the other. I know I've talked to fishes that say
explain
that
this versus. This is an interesting versus. Explain in detail. What is this? Explain this.
I've
versus.
been told many times before that just by being on the fence, I've been told by fish that I'm helping the goat, and I've been told, and I've been told by goat that I'm helping the fish by being on the fence, and that by being on the fence and not choosing somehow helps the other. I've heard it from both sides. Who would you guess?
Well, to be with Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish would guess exactly this. This is Goat versus Fish.
That's the versus.
You have seen it. Of course,
that's the versus as old as time.
Yes, but some verses, but you have not ever found some verses a goat coming up to you, fence sitter, and saying, "Oh, but fence sitter, but don't you lean goat? Oh, join the goat. Well, versus the fish. Some are as this, yes."
No, that's the thing is, okay, so the goats and the fishes, they have their own ways. Any goat would rather a fence sitter just choose in general. They don't expect a fence sitter to be a goat. And most goats know they're goats. Whereas fish are like, they just be happy that you choose as well, but they want you to choose fish, of course. Most goats, they just want you to choose. They don't necessarily want you to choose goat.
Anakin, I have the high fence. The next message for Goat versus Fish. The third message for Goat versus Fish.
Versus Fish. Happy Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish.
And happy Goat versus Fish to you. Oh, who was that, Victor Martinez? Who was that for Goat versus Fish?
That was Fumagalli Chris, and if I remember correctly, the last verses he was a goat, but who knows? He didn't specify those verses in particular.
Fensagalli. Hey, it's a Fensagalli.
It could be a Fensagalli.
Goat versus Fish, but we will say this for Fensagalli, at least we will call you this until you choose Goat or Fish. It got a shirt of Goat versus Fish. It got a shirt of the unity of Goat and Fish. You can see it wearing that versus, once the fence demic has ended and it is out and about in the verses.
That's right. You can see that. You can see that shirt from 6 feet away.
Now, we like it too. We like you to be able to see Goat versus Fish from 60 million verses away. We want you just to see Goat versus Fish forever. Goat versus Fish. Look up. You could probably see Goat versus Fish if you just look up, or if you look to the land, or you look to the sea. Just don't look at the fence. Don't look.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. Yeah, you're looking between the posts on the fence. If anything.
They say some verses. They say that if you look at the fence as you are trying to balance upon it, that it makes it more difficult to balance on the fence. Have you found this to be true?
That's right. You're not supposed to look at the fence as you're balancing upon it. You're supposed to look up or down. Doesn't really matter. Maybe at your feet, maybe at your nose. Don't look at the fence. It doesn't help, especially if you're high up on the fence. It makes it. You might get a little.
Well, in
sick.
that verses, Victor Martinez, do look at the fence. Do look at the fence. Look at it. Look at it.
No, you want me to fall off.
The fourth message for Goat versus Fish.
Yes, Victor got what I was going for, that the Sith make choices. So there are both goats and fish inside the Sith contingency. I'm not super savvy on my lore to make determinations. Can we make formal declarations for fictional characters? I know we let everybody else normally choose for themselves, but can we declare fictional characters for Goat or Fish? Can we do that?
That's what I'm saying. It's Goat Skywalker. I think it's a Goat Dooku. Yoda is probably a fish.
But Yoda is what they are calling. Do they not call say Yoda is Yoda, be it goat or fish, is a Jedi? That would be a fence sitter, you would say.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, it's just a general fence sitter. Yeah.
But do you think it is true? Do you think Yoda is a fence sitter? Do you think that is so? This could put a fence in your whole verses.
It's a very powerful versus either way. I know Yoda is one of the more powerful fence sitters, if that's what he is.
We suppose that if you told the goat and fish that Yoda was the most powerful fence sitter of all, they would probably wanted to choose goat or fish. They would say, no, Yoda's a goat, or no, Yoda's a fish.
Yeah, and in the end, he's just a powerful fence sitter.
Well, we shall have to see. Interesting verses. But we can say this, that the Jedi do not usually verses among themselves, but the Sith do verses one another. It is part of their verses.
Yeah,
yes,
that's right.
It is part of the verses that the Sith are to verses one another. So within the Sith, there can be goat and fish versing one another. That could be the verses.
That's probably what it is. I mean, I guess you have to be a Sith, to understand that. Yeah, the Sith is the verses. The Sith is the choosing. And so I guess each individual Sith. Like Darth Maul, that's a goat right there. He had horns.
Very goat. But it has many horns. And yet, when it came to its fence saber, it couldn't really choose which way it wanted to verse. So it chose to go to both verses.
Yeah, that's right. It's a dual saber.
Which is a bit fancy. And if you look at it, doesn't it sort of look as though it has the scales of a fish upon it? Fish skin?
So possibly. Darth Maul, possibly.
Well, here's a question: Can a Sith also sit on the fence?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the Sith are very powerful. The dark fence. That's the dark fence right there.
Oh, so that fence, goat versus fish.
Unnatural dark fence.
But if to be a Sith is the choosing of goat or fish, then how can a Sith be on the fence if it is choosing goat or fish?
It depends on their mood. They're the type to choose.
You are suggesting that you can choose to be on the fence? What a preposterous verses.
The Sith, they're powerful. You underestimate their dark fences.
Oh, goat versus fish. Oh, let us see the goat versus fish. So the next message for goat versus fish. But goat versus fish. But you had a question. It's Neo had a question for fish. That is what is goat versus fish. Fish. It's Neo the fish. Here's the verses. Of course, you can declare if a fictional character is goat or fish. You can declare whatever you wish to goat versus fish. You can declare that goat versus fish is a false verses, and we will tell you to shut the fence up. This is goat versus fish. But you can declare it. You can declare whatever the verse is to goat versus fish. You can declare it, and goat versus fish. Yes, of course, it is for Duke Skywalker to choose for itself. Juking about. Good. No, you can't catch me, goat. You can't catch me, fish. It can choose for goat or fish for itself, if we can ask it. But in the mean verses, we can have a conversation about if it is goat or fish. And part of the discussion about goat versus fish, some would say, oh, we must have a fair and even verses to have a conversation. But if Luke Skywalker is goat or if it is fish, and they have a conversation, without declaration. But then a goat burst in the verses. Luke Skywalker's a goat, and you all know it. Yes, that is part of the verses. That is also part of the verses of goat versus fish.
Unless we got the opportunity to ask Mark Hamill himself. Upon which I'm sure he'd say.
Oh, is that you, Marcus Hamilton? Marcus Hamilton, come on the Goat versus Fish podcast, Marcus Hamilton. Say if you are goat or fish. Marcus Hamilton, is that you? Is that you, Marcus Hamilton? Is that you, Marcus Hamilton? I'm the Joker. I watched all the Jokers and the fish. Oh, Marcus Hamilton. Yes, we know the verses of Joker fish. But are you goat or fish? It will not say to goat versus fish. We need to get Marcus Hamilton right here on the verses.
What was I thinking?
We don't know. We never know what you're thinking, fence sitter. We never know if you're thinking about goat or fish.
I'm high up here on the fence. I'm just happy. It's a very, it's a new versus mighty versus.
When
very
did you
mighty
begin
versus.
getting high on the fence? When did you begin getting high on the fence? This versus.
About like a couple hours before we started this
Goat versus
versus.
fish. Between fence sitter and goat versus fish, yes, we have known each other a long versus, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Goat versus fish has found that the later in the verses and the higher on the fence you get, you start to repeat your verses.
I just might.
You start to repeat your verses, not like goat versus fish that says goat versus fish in a different verses every verses. Some verses we say goat versus fish, and some verses we say goat versus fish. But no, it is not goat versus fish that is repeating itself. It is the fence. It is the fence. It is the fence. Repetition, repetition, fence post after fence post. The repetition of the fence sitter.
Yeah, you can get lost up here on this fence. I'll tell you. The higher the fence get, you just you lose where you are on the fence. But it's okay. Still having a good time. Still balanced. Not teetering to either side.
Lost in fence. Speaking of star verses. Yes, you have heard of Lost in Space. Why not Lost in Fence? Woo! They went out for a mission. They were lost in fence. Fence spot, danger, 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 Ron Wilkinson, danger. This the fence spot.
That's one of my favorite movies. I like the remake, the one they did in the 2000s with who was in it? It had Joey from Friends. From Fences Friends.
Just fences?
And just fences.
Fences. Fences.
I'll be there for fence, and you're there for me too.
Yes, that is the verses, yes?
I think so. Sounds kind of like it.
It sounds like it. Slapping the bass, slapping the bass. The next message for goat versus fish.
Really? Really? I have to. Fine. Fine, I will accept Jar Jar on Team Fish. Fuck.
Technically, yeah.
Fish. Jar Jar fish.
That's a Jar Jar fish for sure. Technically.
Jar Jar's fish. We are going to put. See, now these verses, we are going to put Jar Jar in the fish verses with its neo, unless there's someone to contest this. And for the fence, we are going to put what it was Anakin that was on. It was Anakin was on the Anakin chose code. It was Obi-Wan was on the fence this verse.
Yeah, Obi-Wan is on the high fence. I have the high fence, Anakin. It's over.
And what of the goat? Was Anakin that verse is choosing goat or fish? We have Jar Jar as a fish. Perhaps Anakin as a goat.
There's a lot that would claim that the whole Skywalker bloodline is goat.
It is all goat. Well, then we will say Anakin is goat for this verses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, next verses, we could have another conversation, and you can attest to this. We could have another conversation about the star verses and goat versus fish, and we could come to a completely different verses.
Yeah, that's what's fun about it.
Goat versus fish. So in the verses now, we have goat with one versus Anakin the goat, one versus Anakin the goat. We have Victor, Fumagalli, and Obi-Wan on the fence, and we have two fish. We have It's Neo reluctantly versing with fish, with fellow fish, Jar Jar fish. Together they are versus the goat. Together they are versus the goat. There are still many fence sitters in this verses. It is still goat versus fish. Welcome to goat versus fish. Choose goat or fish. Spread the verses. We saw one share the verses of goat versus fish. Continue to share that verses. Share this verses. Tell all you know. Tell them all to come watch the verses or listen or whatever the verses. Goat versus fish.
That's right. Listen to Goat versus Fish on Stereo, Twitch, Instagram, Facebook. I mean, I can't think of verses that you're not on. What are
Twitterverse, Patreon,
Twitter?
Cameo with Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish got 2 cameos.
Wow, look at
Yes, they gave
that.
Goat vs. Fish 5 verses, and they said, "Here, Goat vs. Fish, I want you to." One was for, imagine this verses. Goat vs. Fish did a cameo, and they said, "We know one who is a goat," and they gave birth to twins. They said twins, and they said it looked like one of the twins was going to triumph in the verses, and in the verses of quickness, of being born. And then, but just at the last verses, the other twin switched verses. It was the old switcheroo verses. And they said, Goat vs. Fish, we want you to sing of the birth of twin switcheroo verses, but as Goat vs. Fish, and to sing of the verses in celebration. And Goat vs. Fish sang of it in celebration. And then they sent a video to Goat vs. Fish that showed the one who was ordered the cameo for Goat vs. Fish laughing with the little twins, be they goat or baby fish, newborn goat or fish. And it was watching it saying, "Oh, thank you, Goat vs. Fish. We love Goat vs. Fish. Thank you, yes."
Wow, starting off fresh with the verses, even before you know what it is, you know?
Yes. That was the verse it was about. It was about asking them. Ask them when they are ready, and ask them if they are goat or fish, and show them this verses. Perhaps they will choose goat or fish. Imagine the first verses you see when you are born is goat versus fish. First verses. You'll come out with the verses, and it's goat versus fish.
You know, I could tell whenever My Little Verses was born, I could tell that it was going to be a goat. I don't know what it was. It was just the way he gripped my finger as he came out. And, yeah, it's something else. You never know until you see it. It's always a fresh verses. But, yeah, I knew he was going to be a goat. Little goat verses up there sleeping.
Thank you to the 3 who are listening now on the Stereo Verses with Goat vs. Fish. That was a very touching verses, Victor. That was a very touching verses. Next, which is the fourth verses, the fourth message for Goat vs. Fish. Speaking of the fourth verses, Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish has been, when we are live streaming on Twitch, we come up with all kinds of new verses. And we had a verses where there were 4 goat and 4 fish. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Goat versus Fish thinking this could be a versus for it. We are making it written. We make it written so we can, again, stand-up comedian use this as a regular verses. So we are asking you, fence sitter. There were 4 goat and 4 fish in the verses, and then Goat versus Fish said, Goat versus Fish is 4 goat and 4 fish.
Right.
Yes. Goat versus Fish is 4 goat and 4 fish.
That's right. That's what it is. Yeah. Goat versus Fish is for goat and for fish and not for fence. Definitely.
I think Palpatine would have to be a fish because of his like electric power action. That's like an electric eel, which is a fish. And he kind of like to hide himself, also like an eel, and an eel's a fish. So I'm going to say that, Palpatine / the Emperor is a fish.
Emperor Palpatine.
Side.
Darth
You will find that this
Fishius.
fence station is fully operational. Wow. We can say this of the Sith. We can say this of the Sith, that they are not afraid to use the fence in order, for their own verses.
That's right. Darth Fishius. I can see that.
Darth Fish. But do you think Darth Fishius is really a fish, or do you think it's Neo the Fish is just saying, that is a very powerful one. If you're going to be stuck with Jar Jar Fish, we might as well also at least get Darth Fishius. Come on, we need to cancel out the incompetence of Jar Jar Fish with some other kind of strong fish here.
I'm telling you, I think Jar Jar Fish's incompetence was just a front for a very brilliant versus. I could tell after hearing this theory and applying it to Jar Jar Fish's, the events, the way the verses went down.
So
it's interesting.
How is Jar Jar Fish supposed to triumph the goat? Explain the verses. Fish are versus goat. Jar Jar Fish is fish. How does fish try to versus goat? What is the end verses here? How does it triumph the goat?
Well, at the end of the first, Star versus Episode 1, the Phantom versus. Jar Jar had been there at every major event, and apparently had steered the Jedi, which are fences, in the direction of the Gungan army, which would help them, defeat the Federation's robot army. And
well, it was steering them in the direction of its very same fish.
Right, and they never explained why Jar Jar was, I guess, forced to leave or banned from the Gungan village or the bubbles that they lived in.
It is a goat.
It could be, but either way, it was theorized that it's possibly playing the part of a fool, but it's actually a very powerful fence. That's what a theory is. That's what they say. That's one of the verses floating around out there.
But Goat versus Fish, did you notice that those fence armies are so defenseless? Yes, versus is robot fence versus robots droid versus army, and then they say, oh, it is no longer a repetition of droid versus. Now it is clone army. And it is more clones of the fence clone. There's more fence sitters. Such fence sitters just to be chopped up for the verses, grist for the verses. How does it feel to watch your fence sitters just being so casually disposed of in the form of fence troopers and clone fencers and droid fences?
Yeah, you know what they say, you've seen one fence, you've seen them all. Basically.
You've seen one fence. Goat versus fish. Oh, you seen one fence, you seen them all. You seen one fence, you seen them all. You seen that goat, you seen that fish, you seen that fence, but you seen them all. You seen that fence, you seen them all. You seen them short, you seen them tall. You see a goat versus fish, you see a fish, you see a goat, and you see a fence, and you see a fish, and you see a fence, and you see a goat, and you see a fish, and you see a fence, and you see a goat, and you see a fence, and you see a fish, and you see a goat, and you see a fish, and you see a fence, and you see a fence, and I see a fish, 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 and a land of goat, a land of goat, a land of goat, a land of goat, and I see a fish, 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 and the fence. The next message, which is the fifth message for Goat versus Fish.
Are we having a conversation about whether Jedis and Sith are goat or fish? Because, boy, that just made my whole night better.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing, Wander Around. And please let us call back and let us know whether you yourself are goat or fish, because it'll be much easier to tell whether you're a goat or fish, whether or not a Jedi or Darth Sidious is a goat or fish.
Well, Wander Around, it was wandering around the verses last verses. It was a goat last verses, but do you remember wandering around? It was wandering around the verses. It wandered around the fence for a bit, and then we think it became goat.
I have a bad memory. I do not remember Wander Around at all, but it's good to hear. Okay.
So Martinez Spencer, goat versus fish. Listen, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Tries to remember all the goat and fish that come through the verses. Reacquainted. Look, listen, Wander Around. We know that you chose goat. We know that you chose goat, but poor fence sitter. It does not have a remembrance because, well, first verse is it's always high in the fence, and second verse is even though it does not remember, it thinks, oh, I have perfect balance. But actually, it has fallen off the fence many verses and has bumped its ponder many verses, and it does not recall that it has done it. So remind the fence sitter if you are goat or fish. And short verses, yes, we are discussing if Jedi are goat or fish. We are discussing if Sith are goat or fish. And the verses now is that we are thinking that the Jedi are on the fence because they are wanting to maintain balance to the verse. Obi-Wan on the fence, Jar Jar fish, but there is some suspicion that perhaps it was a fish that was exiled from the Sea of the Fish because it was a goat, perhaps. But right now it is fish. Anakin goat, and there is now and Darth Sidious fish. Yes.
That's what it's now is claiming. I don't know any There's no real proof of that. I mean, I guess, like an eel, like an electric eel.
An eel is a fish.
fish.
This is a true versus. You can look up the scientific verses of goat versus fish. An eel is a fish.
And Insidious does have those electric powers. So possibly. I mean, he was also known to manipulate life and death, which, like fish, they procreate asexually, and they could just like, they can have I think frogs don't even need a mate. So yeah, it's possible.
Goat versus fish. And this really makes, if Darth Sidious is fish, then and Anakin is goat, we do see them versus there at the end of episode 6, Return of the Verses. Return of the Jedi, Return of the Fence. Is that Return of the Fence, or is it we suppose it would be the Return of the Fence.
Yeah.
That's what happens. The fence sitter, just as Luke Skywalker says, and then Darth Fisher says, "So be it, fence sitter," and then electric ealing the fence. But then Goat Vader says, "No, we do not want to end the fence sitter. No, just because it sits on the fence doesn't mean we should end the fence sitter, though they are pitiable. We shouldn't end the fence sitter. We should wait for it to choose Goat or Fish in its own verses." And then Anakin the Darth Goat, took Darth Fishiest and threw it over the verses and threw it off of the fence to save the fence sitter that it begat, because it remembers when it was a young fence sitter back in the verses.
That's right, and is that whenever Vader says, "No, Luke, I am your fence."
That was the previous verses. That was the previous verses. But we thought that was saying, "Luke, I am a goat." It's Neo the fish. We believe it was actually there at that verses because it captured a photograph of the verses, a photo, and made a meme of the verses, which must be the true verses because we saw it on the interwebs. And it was Darth Vader declaring, "Luke, I am your goat," and Luke was a fish, and it said, "No," but it said, blah, 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 blah. But Luke could have been a fish because Luke was not a Jedi yet, that verses. It would not reach Jedi fenciness until it resists the temptation of Darth Fishious.
Darth Fishious. Unnatural fenciness. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Goat versus Fish wants to learn how to goat versus fish. 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 Go goat. Go goat. Goat fish. Fish. Whatever the verse is. We got half the verses. Celebration for Goat versus Fish.
In the verse is many verses away.
Yes. Goat versus Fish.
In a verse is many goat versus fish away.
Yes. It was at least Goat versus Fish away. Goat versus Fish was there, actually. Now that we remember.
What others
you would
are
think,
there?
how could Goat versus Fish not remember the Star verses? Well, Goat versus Fish has seen so many verses, but yes, in the beginning there was Goat versus Fish, and though it was a long verses ago, in a Goat versus Fish far, far away, Goat versus Fish was there.
That's right. There's Star versus. There's Harry Potter, the goat. What else is there? Star Trek.
On Harry's Potter. Oh, Harry's Potter. They are all fence sitters. Fence sitters, the lot. Goat versus Fish. They have assorting verses. They have assorting verses, and they sort them into different mammal animals that are not goat or fish.
Oh, assorting verses.
They put the fence on their heads and dance about, and the fence declares what fence sitter you are.
That's funny. I like that.
Ugh. Such false verses. And Harley Potster, it has a fence mark there on its ponder. It's just like you. Just like
That's
you.
right. A fence mark. Right
Let us
upon
speak
it.
of Victor Martinez. You have changed your verses again. Look what you have atop yourself. Look what you have atop yourself. Tell us of the new fashionable Victor Martinez.
Yes, I got a cowboy hat on. And I've been growing my goatee a little bit more with the soul patch attached to it. And I've been curling my mustache. And underneath this hat, there's still some Fensley tattoos.
Is that so? Is that so? You are really taking after this place, this place that they are calling Texas.
Yeah. That's right. I'm enjoying it out here compared to any other place in this verses. This United Versus. It's pretty chill out here. I mean, I'm glad I'm here as opposed to being in California. What would California be? That's a bear. I don't know.
Goat versus fish. Do not. Goat versus fish. Bird versus bear talks about that versus. You cannot even speak of versus to bird versus bear without it saying, oh, California bear versus American eagle bird. How they who shall triumph.
That's
never
right.
accepting it as goat versus fish.
That's a whole nother versus. I don't even want to open that one up.
No, goat versus fish. We don't know goat versus fish. This is goat versus fish.
Yeah, that's what this is.
6, the message for goat versus fish.
Yeah, one of the verses is that Jar Jar is obviously a Force user because he's able to do like crazy moves and just does these crazy moves, and he's just doing somersaults from like a standing position, and you don't see anybody else in the Star Wars universe execute that type of maneuvers. Like, he acts like he's like a drunken fist style character, even though it seems like he's just like a stupid clod, right? He just like gets out of these crazy situations like drunken master style. And the only time you ever see anybody do anything like that in the Star Wars universe is when they're a fucking Jedi or a Sith. They're a Force user of some kind. So I love this. I love the theory of Jar Jar being like a low key Sith Lord. Like, I'm really okay with it.
That's right.
I'll sing ye a song of a fence drinky drink. Yo, blow the fence down. That drinky, oh drink, it was Jar Jar the Pink. Oh, give us some verse to blow the fence down. Jar Jar the fence was a drunkard, was it? Yo, blow the fence down. Said one verse is I am goat, then it said fish. Oh, give us some verse to blow the fence down. Drunken verses, the drunken verses of Jar Jar Binks.
That's right, because it's easier to act like a goofy fish than it is to be like, I mean, you could always be a brilliant fence hiding underneath. You never know. Just
you do not
pulling
think
all
that
the strings.
What is it? Yes, what?
Yeah, like, I think that Jar Jar was like playing aloof, but could possibly be a master fencer. Who knows?
Well, we have never seen it wield a fence.
No. But it could. He could. Jar Jar could have. Who knows?
Well, somewhere off verses, somewhere they did not include that verses. If they had included that verses, it might have been more pleasant to goat versus fish.
Yeah, we have to ask George Lucas, that goat.
It is a goat? George Lucas's goat?
I think so. Greatest of all time type of goat.
Goat versus fish does not know it. You did Starverse. It seemed very goat versus fish, but if you ask goat versus fish, it just got fancy the longer it went. It just got more fancy. We do not know that it is such a master that it is such a master. What fended goat or fish? Oh, goat versus fish. They say,
You're right.
They say, George Lucas made the best story in the universe. Well, what about Goat versus Fish? What about the story of Goat versus Fish? Star versus
well,
is
you
based
know.
on Goat versus Fish. Star versus is actually based on Goat versus Fish. And some say, no, it is based on a biblical verses, or no, it is based on some sort of Japanese verses, ancient Japanese verses. And Goat versus Fish says that it's based on Goat versus Fish. All of those verses are based on Goat versus Fish. Star Wars is based on Goat versus Fish. It's all based on Goat versus Fish. George Lucas did not have an original verses in its conception. It just took the verses from Goat versus Fish, and now Disneyfication. That's rat Disney fence sitter, rattily sitting on the fence, taking all the verses, getting all the verses, not leaving a single verses for Goat versus Fish. Well, Disney, Goat versus Fish does not want your rat verses. Goat versus Fish, you can keep your rat versus Disney. Goat versus Fish is going to be Goat versus Fish, standing proudly as Goat versus Fish. You come catch this verses. You come catch this verses. Disney rat.
Wow. Okay, so the Disney rat is a fence.
Very fancy, very fancy. Look at it. It is always laughing. Ha 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 ha, laughing at Goat versus Fish.
The House of Fence. Interesting. The Mickey Fence Club. Interesting.
Yes, it's the Mickey Fence Club. FENCESITTER. FENCESITTER. Fence sitter. Fence sitter. The fanciest fence there ever was. FENCESITTER. Oh, Goat versus Fish. We need to make that written. We need to remember that verse.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Please hold for Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is going to make it written.
It is written. It is written.
They say Goat versus Fish, you need
House
to
of
practice your
Fence.
verses. You need to practice your verses. They say to Goat versus Fish, the comedian ones, they say you need to practice all of your verses. But every verses, Goat versus Fish is coming up with new verses. Every verses.
That's right. That's why I wanted to do these. You know, every stereo verses, there's going to be a brand new one, a new opportunity for new verses. I would have never guessed of the Star verses and Luke verses and, you know, the Anakin fence sitter, you know, high on the fence. That's great. That's something that wouldn't have happened unless we were on the stereo verses, just trying a new one out. You learn a new verses every single time.
True verses, true verses. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish has a verses. But what have you, fence sitter verses? Have you been creation your own comedy verses? We could tell you all about Goat versus Fish, but Goat versus Fish visits the fence, and we're asking you: have you been writing your own comedian verses? These verses.
There's some open mics out here in Austin. I don't know if this is Goat or Fish out here in Austin. Lots of people would say Austin's a goat, but yes, I've been doing just a few on the fence times, lockdowns. But I haven't been able to do as many on stage verses as I'd like to.
Yes, but are you still scratching? Are you still scratching your verses into the fence posts so you can look upon them later?
Oh yeah, sure. I you know, every once in a while I get in that mode where I just I want to say something, but then I get sad because I know that, you know, you can't get in front of a crowd of people like you used to. You can't just. What's an audience anymore? You know, they can't be within 6 verses of each other. And how many are there left to even perform in front of?
Listen, Victor Jr. Martinez,
like
listen. We know how you are feeling. Goat versus Fish knows, we can say, at least in this verses, we comprehend the fence sitter. We are telling you, on stereo, to make a Twitch. We are telling you, make a Twitch, and then come on the Goat versus Fish Twitch living streams. If we can send you a link, then if you just have a camera and a microphone, then you can just come right on the verses. You can just join the verses. You will be there. We will see you. You can speak to Goat versus Fish. We can verse with the chat. You can be right there on the verses, as long as you just don't go smoking the grass of the land and the sea of the fish right there for all to see, because it might break terms of verses and they might.
That's right.
But apart from that, verses, come join the verses. Be on Goat versus Fish. Be on the verses of Goat versus Fish on the Twitch. Come, fence sitter. Get off your ass and join Goat versus Fish on the Twitch this versus.
Yeah, I might help to do some socializing for sure, at least in that form, even if it is on the Twitch versus.
Yes, and then when you are there with Goat versus Fish, you can be speaking. We can be speaking to one another. We can be seeing one another, and you can be seeing how Goat versus Fish with the chat. It is not the live living versus of the stand-up comedy versus. But comparing to Zoom show and Zoom mic, it is much more Goat versus Fish. It's much more Goat versus Fish.
That's right.
Versus. You do not have to wait 55 minutes of Goat versus Fish. The bench sitting, Goat versus Fish does not have to be sat on the bench for 55 minutes just to get 5 minutes on the Zoom show of Goat versus Fish. We can just be Goat versus Fish for 5 hours, 10 hours of Goat versus Fish.
I know, and you do it, and you really do it. It's impressive. 5 hours of Goat versus Fish, standing no less. Goodness.
Goat versus Fish. How else are we going to? You did High Tonight show. How else are we going to spread our verses? How else are we going to triumph in the verses? We are not out there spreading our verses at every verses. However we can, wherever we can, shouting Goat versus Fish.
It doesn't even feel like labor whenever you love it. When you love the verses.
It's a land of goat and a sea of fish. It's a sea of fish and a land of goat. But Mickey the rat wouldn't leave it at that, and it sat on.
I wanted to ask Goat versus Fish, what about Buck Rogers? Is Buck Rogers a goat or a fish? How about Flash Gordon?
That was an accident. I did not mean to press that button. Sorry.
We accept the verses. It was Chris Benzagali with wanting to know about Flash in the Pan Gordon and what that other verses. A shout out to Venture verses. What is
Flash Gordon and someone else? I couldn't remember. Flash Gordon and who? Sorry, I did not mean to press that button. I did not mean to press that versus. I was letting the Goat versus Fish do a little fucking what do they call it, a celebration. And then my finger slipped. But yes, Flash Gordon.
Yes. Continue.
No, Flash Gordon and who? Who was it? I forgot who else.
Goat versus Fish does not recall, but Goat versus Fish but Goat versus Fish is now going to put that into the verses. Was a land of goat and a sea of fish. That has been part of the verses for a long verses. But then Goat versus Fish can add to that verses. But Mickey the rat called directly into the verses. Acknowledge the Disneyfication of Goat versus Fish. And to say, but Mickey the rat wouldn't leave it at that. Yes, they would find this a very humorous verses.
I like it.
And it sat, and it sat up on the fence.
Goat versus fence.
Do you suppose one versus they're going to sue Goat versus Fish and say you cannot use that celebration?
I mean, how could they? No one owns just the tune, do they?
Oh, you don't think that Mickey the Rat doesn't keep very protective verses over that verses?
Could be. I don't know. It depends on the notes and the tune at which they're sung with, but the lyrics alone, it's like free game. That's how
imagine if they do imagine and then Goat versus Fish takes it before the court. Goat versus Fish takes it before the court, and it is Disney versus Goat versus Fish.
It's a big mouse to try to slay.
And we explain to them, we say, it is Goat versus Fish. Listen, it is Goat versus Fish. And then they say, we don't understand what is Goat versus Fish. You understand Mickey the Rat, but you don't understand Goat versus Fish. Arguing Goat versus Fish. And they say, we need to understand Goat versus Fish. And then Goat versus Fish says, well, then if it pleases the verses, if it pleases the bench, otherwise known as fence, then Goat versus Fish will just be Goat versus Fish. And by the end of the verses, they'll say, "Oh, goat versus fish. We did not know. This judge has seen many verses, but we never saw verses as beautiful as goat versus fish. True verses. Mickey the rat, you can no longer use it. It's a small verses. It belongs to goat versus fish. It is such a beautiful verses, and it just belongs to goat versus fish. This verses is now in session. And the verses and it was written. The verses belongs to goat versus fish. The verses belongs to goat versus fish. I will have order in this verses.
I will have order in this verses. That's exactly how I imagine the verses going.
Yes, these should all be the sketch comedian of goat versus fish. Yes, goat versus fish. But yes, fence sitter, goat versus fish allows you to play a message whenever you wish.
Yeah, my bad. I didn't even mean to press that. I really didn't.
No, fans,
that was an
press the next verses,
accidental verses.
Press the verses by your own verses, not just because goat versus fish is telling you to do the verses. Just do the verses. You can do it. We believe in you.
This verses will be on purpose.
Dude, Disney totally is a rat, and I appreciate these verses very, very much so, especially when it comes to the Star Wars verses. I feel like Disney done did it wrong. It turned them into rat verses instead of good classic goat versus fish verses because, I will say, though, it has redeemed itself with The Mandalorian. I will say that. I will say that much because the Mando's a goat. He's a total goat.
That's what I was gonna
I'll give him that much. He's a very fine goat.
Mandalorian goat. That's what I was thinking. Mandalorians are goats, for sure. This is the goat.
Mando goat. And what of baby goat versus fish? Oh, there is a goat in the Twitch streams of goat versus fish that they named Baby Goata.
Baby Goata.
Yes. And goat versus fish. Let us see what else has been happening. What else has been happening in the Twitch verses? Let us tell you what happened this verses. This verses, there's a verses of the bits of contribution, the donation, the Twitch donation to Goat versus Fish, Venmo at GoatVsFish. And you would not believe the verses. Goat received 500 bits on the Twitch for the verses of Goat. 500 bits. And Fish received 501 bits. It was a narrow bit triumph for Fish. By 1 bit, the Fish did triumph. By 1 bit.
Wow. That's all it takes is 1 bit.
Yes. The verses began with a fence sitter giving 1 bit to Goat and 1 bit to Fish. And then Fish received 500 bits. And so it was 501 for Fish. And then the fence sitter gave 499 bits for Goat, but it was still 1 more bit. And we got to the end of the verses. We said last verse for bits, last verse for bits. And the Fish did triumph by 1 bit in the verses of the bits.
No kidding.
Yes. What would you have done in that verses? Would you have given a bit to Goat so it was even for Goat and Fish, or would you have just given all your bits to the fence? What would your verses be?
I like to say I'm unbiased, but it'd probably go towards the fence. The fence is truly a mutual zone. And, fences, we got to look out for each other in most situations.
We have not yet had a verses of the Goat versus Fish, of the living streams of Goat versus Fish that has gone full fence. There's been a bit fenciness in the verses, but we have not had one. In this verses, there were 9 Goat and 10 Fish. 1 Fish came in just at the last verses. And there were 4 fence sitters. We determined, listen what you are missing on the Twitch. We determined that chicken was Fish. And that shrimp was Goat.
What?
And shrimp versus chicken was Goat versus Fish.
Fascinating. Okay, I would have never guessed this. Okay, so shrimp or goat?
This is what happened, yes. Let us sing you of the verses. In Goat versus Fish, in the recent verses of Goat versus Fish on the Twitch. The chicken was fish, the chicken was fish, the chicken was fish, and the shrimp was goat. And the chicken said, "Wow, you look like a shrimp." And the shrimp said, "What are you, chicken?" And the chicken said, "No, I am a fish." And the shrimp said, "No, I'm a goat." And it was shrimp versus chicken. That was goat versus fish. It was goat versus fish.
You're it's
shrimp.
weird.
You're a chicken. You're a shrimp. You're a chicken. What are you, a shrimp? What are you, a chicken? No, it was goat versus fish.
I don't know why. It makes more sense that a chicken is fish. Like, that makes a lot of sense to me. I get it. All right, a chicken is fish. Yeah, it sounds about right. But a shrimp being goat, I just never would have guessed. I couldn't have thought that in a million verses.
But ponder it for verses. Ponder it for one versus, fence sitter, if you can. Contemplation. Think of if a shrimp is a goat or a fish, and let us hear what would your evidence be that shrimp is goat?
I mean, other than shrimp being the greatest of all time, like it's shrimp are good with anything. This is shrimp is goat, and in that aspect is like good. Shrimp is like good, the great of all time.
Yes, but we know that the greatest of all time versus it is somewhat of a weak versus. Anyone can claim to be the GOAT.
Right. But other than that, I don't know. It's like, what are they? Okay, I guess they got a bunch of arms. They clean up. Goats aren't necessarily like that. I don't know. What else is there?
Well, think of this verses. Think of this verses that when the shrimp starts to curl about, it looks as if it is a horn of a goat.
Oh, wow. The shrimp will look like horns of a goat. I guess that could be one. I could be. That's something there. That's something. It didn't occur to me until now. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And then there is shrimp that are in the sea of the fish. But then one in the chat said, but there are land shrimp as well. And we did a search. We searched DuckDuckGo. A bit fancy, but it cannot be possibly even more fancy than Google. And we looked at DuckDuckGo, and it showed us pictures of fence. We go to DuckDuckGo whenever we want to examine the fence, the interfence, and it says that the fence. It says that the shrimp, there is a land shrimp. There is such a verse that says a land shrimp.
Very goaty. Land shrimp. Goat land shrimp. Sounds tasty.
The next message for goat versus fish.
I promise I will attend more Twitch verses. I promise. Because, yeah, why not? Why not? I'm branching out. I'm hitting up new platforms. I'm fucking taking over TikTok right the F now. So, yeah, why not learn Twitch too? Let's do it.
It's Neo the Fish. You must join the Twitch. They actually have a categorization that is called fortune telling. We think that is similar enough to your verses.
Fortune telling on the Twitch. You know what? I need to get on the fence Twitch as well.
Yes, you do. We are telling you, take it from Goat versus Fish. We have seen the verses. We have seen the promised verse. And these verses, it is calling itself Twitch. In other verses, it may be different verses. In other verses, it may be different verses. And we still like to come to the stereo because this is another verses. You must be in all the verses, it is true. And it's Neo the Fish. You can join, perhaps you can come on the stream of Goat versus Fish, and you can do a little reading of Goat versus Fish. You can do a reading for Goat versus Fish, and we can talk about how it is all Goat versus Fish. And you will say, no, it is a Scorpius. And Goat versus Fish will say, Goat versus Fish. Looks, is it a goat or a fish? Let's keep it about Goat versus Fish. And we can have a whole verses about it.
A whole verses.
Yes. Yes. But yes, you are used to just sitting about there and talking, speaking to the ones. Yes, speaking to the ones.
Yes, I am. I am indeed, and I'm just glad. I'm happy to have this new verses here in the merry. What is it? Great verses, merry verses, happy new verses.
Goat versus fish. We think this has been an excellent versus of goat versus fish. We are going to call it now. This is going on the Goat versus Fish podcast. This shall go on the Goat versus Fish podcast.
Yes, on the Goat vs. Fish podcast, please go like and subscribe on Apple iTunes podcast, Goat vs. Fish podcast. All these stereo verses live on in the Goat vs. Fish podcasts.
And there are two goats. There is Anakin Goat. There is now Mando the Goat. Oh, speaking of Mando the Goat, it's Neo the Fish. You say that Disney the Rat redeemed itself all because they had just one goat versus of Mando the Goat. While you are being so fascinated with Mando the Goat and Baby Goat, if you just bother to even look over your verses, you will see that Mickey Rat is just producing billions upon billions of fences and just burning verses, just so you can say, oh, look, it is Mando the Goat. Oh, redemption for Mickey the Rat. Oh, it is still producing such fences. Goat versus Fish. Goat
You
versus
think it's
Fish.
fence propaganda?
Well, do you think that Mickey the Rat gives a flying fence about Mando the Goat? It is always just creating new goat and fish. It's creating new goat and fish. Oh, here's a fence, there's a fence, there's a goat, there's a fish, whatever the verse is. Yes, and it is just waiting for you to look and go, oh, that is a nice looking goat. And then it says, oh, very well, we will do this goat until you tire of the goat, and then it will no longer be the goat. They will milk that goat until it is dead, and then you will no longer have the goat. And it will keep trying to sell and repackage the goat for all verses. And then by the time you are in your 100th verses, you will say, wow, I can't believe I used to like that goat. And now they have just turned it into pets.
It's a verses as old as time, Goat and the Fish.
Yes. Even now there are goat versus Mickey the Rat. Mickey the Rat and Goat versus Fish. I've always been trying to fence it, Goat versus Fish. You know, Disneyfication, they offered to buy Goat versus Fish.
Hey, that's a good deal. Hey, you know what? If you can get the correct verses right there, that could work out.
Now, Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish wants to say that it will never sell out to Mickey the Rat. Just on the verses of it. Just on the verses of it. Just on the verses of it. Just to make Goat versus Fish just all the more Goat versus Fish. Never bow down to Mickey. No. Goat versus Fish will not be bought by Mickey the Rat. Goat versus Fish will buy Disney. Goat versus Fish will become such a powerful versus that we will buy Mickey the Rat and we will tell it to get off the fence and it will choose Goat or Fish. It will be Goat versus Fish buys Mickey the Rat. They will say, oh, Goat versus Fish. We thought we could defeat you, Goat versus Fish, but now Disney is a shamble. Disney is a shamble. They're not watching our verses anymore. They're all just watching Goat versus Fish. They're all watching Goat versus Fish Plus and the Goat versus Fish Network, and no one likes Disney anymore. They realize it is Mickey the Rat. Oh, please, Goat versus Fish, please buy us to support our verses. We have fences to support. We have fences to support. Will Goat versus Fish take pity on Mickey the Rat? Will Goat versus Fish take pity on the pitiable fence to Mickey the Rat? Find out on the next verses of Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish.
Let us hear these messages, yes?
Yes.
Victor, shrimp live in the ocean. What the fuck?
That's what I was thinking.
It seems an obvious versus.
Right? Okay, so shrimp live in the ocean, but they're goat. I mean, because they curl like the horns of a goat. Okay, so that's what we got going so far. I don't know. I'm too high up on this fence to even try to rationalize what's happening there.
And the land shrimp.
There's also land shrimp. So, you know, if you can follow.
So much like a fish, it kind of crawls about the land of the deep land of the goat that is beneath the sea of the fish.
It's blowing my fence, to say the least.
Yo, blow the fence down. Goat versus fish. Let us see. And goat versus fish. What there was one other versus stream, but radiation, goat versus fish, and well, there have just been a lot of verses on the Twitch. It is a celebration.
Definitely go check out GoatVsFish on Twitch. I'm gonna be there more. I'm gonna make some more fancy presents.
And now here comes the next message for Goat versus Fish. This next message, which may be the last message, right now we have 2 goat, Anakin Mando goat. We have 3 fence, Victor Junior Martinez, Chris Pensagali, Obi-Wan, and there was that goat well, it used to be goat that's wandering around, but it did not choose goat or fish this versus.
It did not.
It did not choose goat or fish this versus. And then for the fence, it's Neo, Jar Jar, and Darth Sidious, and that is the versus. It looks like it is going to be a time for fish, but let us see on this next message for Goat versus Fish.
Heck yeah, I will frickin' do a reading on Goat versus Fish. Why the heck not? I'm down. I got a camera. I got a place I can set up when I kick my partner out of my office because it's supposed to be mine, but it's his because of COVID and shit, but we'll make it work. We'll make it work. I just need a little time to plan in advance, and we can make it happen.
Yes. You just, what did it call it? Did it call it a partner? Did it say to Goat versus Fish?
Yeah, a partner for the reading of Goat versus Fish to see if Goat versus Fish is goat or fish. There's a reading. There's probably some stars and some cards that will say whether or not it's leaning more goat or fishy.
Do not expect Goat versus Fish to just take it fancy on you. Goat versus Fish is going to give you the full verses. You know, when you ask, so Goat versus Fish, when is your verse day, Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish is going to tell you that in the beginning there was Goat versus Fish, and you are just going to have to find a way to read Goat versus Fish. We are Goat versus Fish. It will be Goat versus Fish, and we will confront every bit of fanciness. It will be Goat versus Fish now. You understand? It will be Goat versus Fish. But we welcome you. We welcome you to Goat versus Fish.
That's going to be a good one. That's going to be a great versus. I can't wait.
And the fish do triumph. The fish do triumph over the goat. The fish do triumph. The fish do triumph over the goat. It's Nail the fish, led the fish with Jar Jar Binks and Darth Sidious.
Yes.
The Anakin and Mando goat. The fish did triumph over the goat, and Victor Martinez sat on the fence. And Chris Pensagali sat on the fence. And Obi-Wan said, I have the high fence.
Oh, fence one Kenobi.
Oh, fence one Kenobi was high on the fence. And Anakin was tired of sitting around, so it leapt from the foundational fence, and it chose Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Mickey
That's
the Rat,
right.
we know. Mickey the Rat, we know you have taken control of Star Fence. But it will be Goat versus Fish. It will be Goat versus Fish.
And Fence Wendu.
And it was written.
Fence Wendu said, "We grant you the rank of Master Fence Sitter." What does he say?
We grant you the rank of Master Fence Sitter, but you cannot sit on the Council of Fences. We grant you the rank of Master Fence Sitter, but you cannot sit on the fence.
And Anakin Fence Sitter said, "It's not fair."
It does not seem fair to Goat versus Fish. You are a Master Fence Sitter, but you cannot sit on the fence. But you're a master fence sitter, but you can't sit on the fence. What do they expect? They expect it to sit on the fence when they tell it can't sit on the fence, and then it has to go choose goat or fish? What are they expecting from these verses?
Oh, that's hilarious. Fence Windu with his purple.
Let us all recount the
fence
verses.
saber.
Let us make it written. The verses. Fence window. The wind is blowing down this. It never blew down fence window. Fence window until it went right out the fence window until Darth Fishius just slammed it right out the fence window.
That's right. With his electric fish eel.
The electric fish. Using the power of the electric fence, the fish eel blasted fence window out of the window and down, cast it down. Fence window, cast it down. Fence window said, we grant you the verses of Master Fence Sitter. But you cannot sit on the fence.
You cannot sit on the fence. Oh, that's so funny. That's a good verse, isn't it? That's funny.
This is why we need a whole bunch of goat and fish and fence sitters who really believe in goat versus fish, so we can take all of these verses and turn them all into goat versus fish.
That's right. Those are good memes right there. Those are powerful memes that are used quite often. I have the high fence. Oh,
I have the high fence. Goat versus fish does want to shout out one that is called Read Right. READWRYT on the Twitterver. And it is making all kinds of memes for Goat versus Fish. It put Goat versus Fish in 2100 a space modification, and it put Goat versus Fish in the way that the verse stood still, and it's putting Goat versus Fish in all kinds of verses. It is amazing verses.
That sounds like amazing verses.
And then we need you, Fence Sitter, to spread the memes of Goat versus Fish. You are the meme spreader. You should be spreading the memes of Goat versus Fish.
That's right. The more I see them, the more I will spread them. Absolutely.
Goat versus Fish is going to make a nice, tidy verses of all the memes of Goat versus Fish and send them to you. And just once a verses, choose a random meme of Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. We may find use for this fence yet.
Absolutely. I will slip them into all my other meme verses.
Spreading the verses. It has just as much a meme as any other meme, except that it is actually Goat versus Fish, and all of the memes are Goat versus Fish.
They all are. They really all are.
Yes, where can they follow you to see you spread the memes of Goat versus Fish?
That's at Victor Martinez Jr. I don't put Fence Sitter on there, but Victor Martinez Jr. on all platforms, and I usually represent fences. You could just tell. You could just see it by the way I post. It's a Fence Sitter's post.
Fish. Goat versus Fish. Oh, Goat versus Fish. Incoming verses. It seems that in your false political verses, it says that in the Georgification senatorial offense, that Warnock beats Loeffler, moving the Demlicans closer to controlling the verses.
All right.
But Ossoff shows momentums against Purdue, but versus is too close to call. Will it go to the Demlicans? Will it go to the Republicrats? Goat versus Fish does not know, but just know that you heard it first from Goat versus Fish. Whatever the verse.
Right. It's a breaking verses right there.
You know that the fence, the lame fence media will tell you all kinds of things, but Goat versus Fish. Have you ever been watching the lame fence media, and they are asking all these questions, asking all the questions? Have you ever once heard the lame fence media ask if a chicken is a goat or a fish?
Never, not once.
Never. They have never asked if a chicken is a goat or a fish. They'll report on chicken. They'll say, Americanization is consuming 1 billion verses of chicken every verses. But never once did the fence stream meatification ask if a chicken was a goat or a fish. But when you come to the Twitch streams of Goat versus Fish, you get the verses. We ask the verses. We ask the real verses. We ask if a chicken is a goat or a fish. We ask if a chicken is a goat or a fish. And we asked in a poll. We made a Twitch poll, and we polled those watching Goat versus Fish if a chicken was a goat or a fish. And they said 3 said that the chicken is goat, and one said that the chicken is a fish. But Goat versus Fish doesn't trust the polls. Goat versus Fish doesn't trust the polls. The polls is a poll of a fence. It is a fence poll. It is a fence poll. And because they said that 3 goats said that chicken was goat and 1 was fish, Goat versus Fish does not trust the polls, because in Goat versus Fish we give you the real verses, and the chicken is a fish this versus. It is the reverse of the polls. If the fence poll says a chicken is a goat, then Goat versus Fish says it is a fish, fence poll. Goat versus Fish.
That sounds about right.
Well, will you do us the verses of the final verses? There seems to be one more verses.
One more verses, and then that'll be in the end of this verses on the stereo verses in particular. Here we go.
Keep hearing you say it as fence window. I don't know why, but that's making it so much funnier in my head right now.
Celebration! Goat versus Fish is funny in your head.
Fence window with the purple saber, with the purple fence saber.
Yes.
Very funny.
Oh, one more verses. Thank you for laughing at Goat versus Fish.
I'm a fence sitter that uses windows.
All right, that is the end of the verses. Thank you for joining Goat versus Fish. Thank you, Chris Vincentali. That was Goat versus Fish. Nothing to verse here. Nothing to verse here.
Nothing to verse here.
Nothing to verse here. We did not end on a fence note. Thank you, Victor Junior Martinez, for joining Goat versus Fish. This has been a stereo versus of Goat versus Fish.
Woo!
And it was written,